Actually, I'm going to start off right now with my own question because I have one that it just seemed relevant to both presentations. One of the questions I have is, fine, you've trained 540 operators. I'm sure Axons has trained maybe similar or more, at multiple sites. That's all great. But what if you're trained in an operator like, one of the well-known operators was Homer Simpson, right? He was really a good nuclear plant operator. But what if you get Homer Simpson in there? Would you certify Homer? I mean, do you certify your operators in the sense that you have to give them a very specific set of tests to determine that he knows how to use that simulator with a sufficient level of competence that you now trust him to run this dangerous high consequence process? So let's start, David, maybe.
Yeah. Absolutely. Doing metric-based analysis of your performance is a feature of any training program. You have to test. What we do is normally we do time in or out of alarms for particular scenarios, and it's that simple. We need to make sure that the operators can recover from surprises and analyze the situation and react to alarm conditions.
So if they fail, do you give them another chance or do you fire them?
Well, we're not responsible for their hiring and firing of our clients' operators. So what we tend to do is give them more opportunities to learn.
All right. I think that's normal procedure. Although I know in the nuclear industry, there are kind of some very specific guidelines in terms of what characteristics that you have to look for when you go to hire an operator. So, it's very, some operators are high school diploma, some are 2 years of technical school, very few require PhDs to operate. But nevertheless, Narendra, do you have some comments on certifying your operators to operate your units?
Yeah, we have for each OTS module, we have a set of scenarios, like one is a startup scenario, shutdown scenario, and then each module we are delivering 25 malfunction scenarios. So each malfunction scenario will will produce a report, how he operated how he could come out of that situation. So we kind of put some critical parameters, like if he crosses this parameter by this much of time, this amount of time, and then so you deduct this many marks, and then so there is a mechanism we configured inside. So we certify people. So that at the end of the day, the report a report gets generated out of it.
I'll give another story. You guys turned me off, didn't you? I talked to another training expert. Actually, she was from Chevron at the time, and she was very much into the human part of the operator behavior. There's a certain culture in control rooms of, oh, this is the best operator. That sometimes operators can be very competitive. And she made a point that, so the question came up is, okay, we had all of these operators go through the training program. And, normally the senior operators should have got a higher score on their proficiency testing than the junior operators. And so the question came up is, should they publish the scores of all of the operators, in the public place? All right. So I'll be curious maybe what some people would have an opinion on that. But basically, she came up with the idea that would be a very bad idea. All right. Because we don't want operators to get too competitive. There are situations where operators, for various reasons, had particular knowledge how to operate a unit and didn't always train the incoming operator with all of their know-how so that they could be the exclusive expert at that process, and nobody could be a better operator than them. So I just give you kind of an idea that type of behavior can occur in real control rooms. So are you guys just pass-fail?
Yes.
All right.
Pass-fail and then give another chance to.
So it's pass. I suppose eventually, you might find Homer Simpson tried 47 times and he failed every time. And you might, hopefully your management took note of that because, Okay, could we have some questions from the audience, please? Can we get him on the microphone, or else it never makes the recording?
Hello. On the competitiveness part of this thing, it happens naturally, I think. I mean, I've seen it when we go to train people, like you're mentioning when people go on breaks, when you're not training and now you're just playing, it becomes, they almost challenge each other. It becomes a game. Or, who can do this in a shorter amount of time, or who can make less mistakes and things like that. Now, from our side, when we put together the simulator, the software has the capability of scoring. But we learned pretty quickly that was not we shouldn't even go in there. I mean, if they want to score, if the customer wants to come up with some scoring scheme, let them do it, let they decide what's good, what's bad, because otherwise we become liable for whatever our view of the training may be. So it's a tricky subject. And you were saying, should you fire somebody for failing or something like that? There's where you have, the unions might start barking at you. So it's a touchy subject. And I think what ends up happening, it's almost like a case-by-case thing. Some people may decide to use the training system in a certain way. I haven't seen anyone where they used it as a condition of employment. It's a requirement to take the training, but not like if you fail, that you're out or something like that. There'll always be a second chance or something like that. So, tricky subject you brought up there.
Yeah, but that's what really happens,
Yeah,
and
I know,
those
I know,
things
I know.
are very important in terms of understanding actually how the process unit
Yeah.
gets involved. And so it's very important that the management, I think, in any facility create an environment where everyone is always trying to do their best to make the process safe first, efficient second, and work as a team in a cooperative environment. So it's very important to be careful. I've for example, you could be a manager and you say, I want that product to be on specification 100% of the time. You went off spec 3 times last week. This will be 100%. So what does he do? He cranks up the reboiler heat, cranks up the reflux, burns huge amounts of fuel. We are making, instead of 98% project purity, we're making 99.7, possibly, you could waste a lot of energy to achieve that goal. So you have to be careful what goals and objectives you're asking your operators to achieve. And
I have a comment on this.
So, Greg, can you give us a comment on that?
Yes, Greg Deerwater. I think you have an opportunity to turn the operator competitiveness around in the favor of training. You don't want training to be punitive or a situation where they feel like grades are going to be used against them. But our experience has been that very big users of this, they will use the scenario-based training, and some operator will emerge as the best. And it's always a question of deducting. You start at 100% and then you get points off for something, but then you establish like a 90% grade or something. You don't expose that, but that becomes the trend or the trace that everybody strives for, and they sort of compete against themselves. Nobody likes this, he got an 89.6% and we're going to publish it. That kills it. But it's in the software.
Just make sure you manage that. Jennifer, I would like to get your comments on the topic of operator certification, training, and creating the environment for success.
Thank you. Jennifer Pergessa from Honeywell. Yeah, my comment on that would be that I think in general, competency results should always be kept private, and they're actually a tool to be used by management to possibly even reorganize the way shifts are staffed. So if you could tell that you have certain operators that are better than others, and you want those people to network together and understand how they can learn from each other in their native environment, I think that can be a very important tool. And knowing those scores can help management assess the level of competency. Excuse me. And competency can have many different levels. And so you could have basic competency all the way to masterful competency. And it's important for organizations to understand where their operators are in that journey so they can staff and use their operators accordingly.
So I have another question. You know, most, excuse me, most facilities have console operators and field operators. And I suppose you could ask, well, why do we even need field operators? Everything's highly automated. But I think most people would say that you need somebody to patrol your unit, figure out what maintenance is going on in your unit, figure out what changed from day to day. There's certain visual activities, there's smells, there's sounds, there's the physical inspection of corrosion and all kinds of things that you just cannot do in the console. So everybody has console and field operators. And, you know, they're often just communicating with push-to-talk. You often see Motorola, dominant supplier for Motorola push-to-talk radio set. Hey, I'm out of valve 101. You know, I need to look at this. So within Reliance and within the Axon's facilities, do the field and console operators, you know, oftentimes you had to be a field operator first and graduate to console. The console was a higher status job in some cases, but some facilities require that there is no permanent field and console and they are swapping places. Could you comment on whether that would be a good idea or whether you actually enforce such a policy or how you might make sure that that communication between field and console operators is improved?
I'll go, yeah. Generally, we like to train both the control room operators and the field operators together. We have the field operators going through the same training, learning the same information. Whether or not they're going to operate the control system on the DCS in real life, it doesn't matter. They still need to learn that. Additionally, we do take, for inexperienced operators, greenfield installations, we will work with other sites to bring the operators, the whole group of them, on site so that they can see the units in operation and learn from the experience of being in an actual operating plant, what can go wrong. But that's not simulators. That's a different type of training. Unfortunately, it doesn't lend well to merging that with the simulator-based training at the same time. But it does work very well, particularly for the more complicated units where you have to learn what specific pumps sound like when they're operating well and what they don't sound like when they're not. And you can't do that in a control room. You can't do that on a computer, as far as I know. Now, when these virtual reality people get really good, I'll be very happy. But.
Yeah, I mean, in Reliance, especially in the greenfield projects, of course, we are offering, I mean, we are training our field operators also on the OTS simulators because we have, sorry.
Closer.
Is that, okay, yeah. So in, especially in greenfield projects, we ensure that, okay. So we use the operator simulator, OTS models for even field operators, especially in greenfield projects. We have done that. In gasifier, which is like a very critical and the first of its kind in Reliance, we trained all the people, like almost 172 people we trained on the initial cut model, so that at least people will understand the process, even field operators understand the process.
So in ARC's analysis of operator training simulators, we have what we call immersive training simulators, and these would be the 3D virtual reality type simulators. There are essentially a number of different combinations and situations there. But the immersive training simulator market is in the range of 5% of the overall OTS marketplace. So that means they're not in there. But yet the millennials, we hear all the millennials are really love to go with the kind of the Xbox controller, Oculus Rift headsets and all of the technology that's there. They're very effective. And certainly that type of thing, it tends to be used more on the greenfield project where you don't have a real plant to walk through to train field operators. But I want to ask our suppliers from Honeywell and also from Corey's, we have certainly seen the marketplace produce simulators that can integrate the 3D dimensional spatial simulation with the control system simulation and the process simulation all as one integrated thing. And people can walk inside a space, with headsets or virtual video games, even on a flat screen. It's possible to do this. There's a number of different technologies out there. Can you comment on the feasibility of providing that and some of your observations of how well that technology has been received, or even predict where it's going to go?
Yeah, for my comment on that, I would say that the technology is evolving quickly, which is excellent, because though we have solutions now, we know that the solutions are just going to continue to improve. And we know from understanding the worker of today that those are the type of solutions that they want to be using. So workers of today, we heard a lot about that this week in some of the workshops. They love to use digital devices. They love to communicate with each other using digital devices, and they want to be able to learn, but they're also impatient to learn. So it's important to also have those devices have connectivity to a subject matter expert in the moment so that they can use those devices and learn. But the intention is not to learn in isolation. The digitization with these devices is not to isolate the trainee and have them learning by themselves. It's important that they learn at their own pace and they are allowed to learn on their own schedule, but they also want to be able to learn as a team. And learning as a team requires these devices. And so I really think that the market will go there, and it will go there quickly as we all embrace the idea that team training, learning from each other, is really the learning style that today's employees require.
Well, just to speak to your question about is it available or what do I see, I do agree with your figures. 5% maybe even seems high for us. I think the trend I'm seeing, though, that all the major customers that we have, the multinational oil companies and the large petrochemical manufacturers that have had a executive sponsorship of training simulation for 20 years, and so they're making the investment, who, by the way, just happened to say that the simulator is just icing on the cake, and we have 99% of other things here we do to get our people trained. It's just a tool. They, in the last 2 years, have made, because it's been demonstrated, 3D add-ons for greenfields and wireless FOD training in the field for brownfields or DCS migration projects, meaning that the value's been noted inside the companies and that they're saying, okay, now we're going to always buy it. So it's become a way to address all the aging workforce with the millennials and the people that haven't been able, they don't even know where to walk the plant. So we're seeing the emergence of Wi-Fi in the refineries and the petrochemical plants support this technology. We've seen iOS devices that support them and tablets to communicate to the simulators. So it's all in place. I personally get a little bit dizzy with the Oculus Rift and all this kind of thing. So I guess the young guys can manage it. But that, again, is being requested. First-person avatar, augmented reality, or the immersive technologies are all being requested by all of our major customers. So we're providing that now, as are the other suppliers. It's out there.
At ARC, we've been watching that market for several years, and we were thinking that at some point that it would reach kind of the point where it just breaks off and breaks into a big growth market. We're still seeing signs that it might get growth, but we also know that that training field operators, and I know I've written some things on this, training field operators, immersive training simulators can only do so much to train field operators. There are certain situations that you really need to practice. For example, I've been in some facilities where they emulate a man-down scenario. So they have some physical a real person go up on a second deck of a tower or something, and he just has a simulated heart attack, and they have to then execute the rescue. And the actual execution of the rescue in real time with real ambulance and real people is a very valuable resource for training operators that you're unlikely to be able to achieve in an immersive training simulator. That's not to say that the immersive training simulators don't have their place. There's lots of things that I think we're coming, and the technology has gotten cheaper. It's cheaper than ever to build 3D models from photographs alone or using LiDAR. So it's an interesting thing to keep your eye on. I think there is a lot of possibilities for that. Any other questions from our audience? Any other comments that anyone would like to make on the panel or speakers? I think we had some really fabulous talent up here. I'm just boggled by 1.2 million barrels per day. A typical refinery is good-sized refinery is 100,000 barrels per day. That's 12 refineries worth of refineries, right? That's a big thing. And then it's not just a refinery. There's integrated petrochemical plants. There's all kinds of you have chlor-alkali plants I saw on the back end of that. You have all kinds of additional complicated processes. So let me ask you that question is then, could you simulate all of these together in one big simulator, all interconnected?
Yeah, I mean, this is back to
In the
these
microphone,
guys. If
please.
they can produce if they can support the backend.
Our usual answer is you can't train that many people at one time, so it's not a good case.
I think that's a fair answer. I could imagine that you need a networked collection of supercomputers, but
Yeah, I mean.
But it has extended to a whole plant.
The gasification complex, where we had 5 units, which are like a comparatively very big. I mean, yeah, just as he said, like there is no point in integrating them because you had to have 15 people ready to take the complex startup and shut down. So, I mean, even for the cracker units, we have not delivered the integrated model. We are separating hot model and cold model separately because we wanted to keep it simple.
all right. I'd like to give a big round of applause for our speakers.